he was in his 80s, but he up and died on me last year, so had to find a new one.
Hey guys, welcome. I'm honored to be here. I was saying earlier, this is like putting the student in front of all the teachers to make a presentation, because I think I've learned something, or a lot of somethings from many of you. So I've got a lot to show. I've tried to make it unschool-like history. I've got a lot of pop culture, a lot of fun stuff mixed in here. It's a little dry just in the beginning, too many word slides that I haven't fixed yet, but we'll get through it, and it'll be, I promise, it'll be entertaining. And I probably have some things you've never seen, some things out of industrial design, some things out of some of the plants, but on the other hand, I hope afterwards you'll all share things with me. If I'm wrong on dates or models, tell me afterwards, and if you stop me, we'll get to about slide 4, and then we'll not get any further. So this is just a little background. How did I get this job? At least once or twice a month, somebody tells me I have the best job they could imagine, and they want my job. And I worked for the ad agency that had the International and the Navistar account. I work on, regular design stuff, brochures, catalogs. I work for McDonald's, Sony, Abbott. I work for a lot of big companies, but Navistar was one of the more interesting ones. And I designed this book, Milestones, the history of the company. Spent 2 years at it, and I got hooked. Some of you guys, I got the disease. I couldn't stop. The book was published, and all I did was continue to study the history. When I was working on it, I worked with Lee Grady at the archives, which I'm sure many of you know. I worked with Fred Krisman. I only met Fred once, but we exchanged FedEx packages once a week or every other week for a couple of years, and phone calls often. So I studied on my own, and then in 2011, the company was planning a museum, and they hired me to be whatever I wanted to be. They wanted me to be there to help work with the museum design committee and the outside design firm. They wanted me to be their archivist, and I argued to be the historian so I could have broader responsibilities. But I'm a generalist. I'm not, I know many of you guys helped me do my job. 183 years of history, trucks, tractors, farm equipment. It's way too much for me to take in, but I don't know the stuff, but I know who knows the stuff. I'm sort of the hub, the connector. So what do? I collect stuff all the time, especially the modern history. I was just at Springfield yesterday, picking up 2 boxes of old photos that they were squirreling away in a closet. Now I'm going to get to the archives. They'll be scanned. They'll be online. We'll all be able to see them. And in the last 6 months, I've been making reports for people. We have a lot of new people from General Motors or Chrysler, people running the company, and they go out, and the head of our global operations was going to Australia and said, "Tom, did we ever have a plant there?" Well, yeah, but so he said, "I don't want to embarrass myself." So I spent like 3 weeks putting together a report on what we did in Australia, what plants we had, what products we made, when we did it, how the competition sort of forced us to build plants there rather than just continue importing. And then the Australian press is apparently coming to Navistar in August here, the automotive press, for some, I think we're, going to sell a new product or something in Australia. I can't tell you, but I don't know also. I mean, it won't be a new product for the company, but a new product maybe in Australia. So the guys here in Lisle, Chicago, wanted to know what we've done there. I just did a report on the history of Springfield for our tax department. There's they're taking a case to court, and they needed to present the fact that we've been in Springfield for a while. And, the tax accountants know, they don't know if we've been there for 20 years or, they have no, they needed background. So, but it's nice that, I'm starting to work more and more with management, and somebody thinks I'm doing something important because, you know, my job was, you know, I work for the facilities department. It's not, you know, so I did this milestones book, and that's really what got me started. But here's a graphic I created a couple years ago that, you know, people didn't understand. You know, people still today in the company say, why does everybody say IH? Why doesn't anybody know the Navistar name? I said, well, look, you know, I mean, it was around for a while. It was parts of people's lives for all those years. It isn't, you know, it just takes a while to, you know, get into the culture, and we're not there yet. We're working at it. This story you probably know, but this is a general presentation. But, you know, Cyrus at 22, his father worked on the Reaper for years and got close but couldn't close the deal. Cyrus, in 6 weeks in the summer, you know, he was a damn kid, but you know, he did it. He figured out the missing things his father couldn't figure out. He engineered it. This is what his biographer says, and you know, people tell me that I was warned not to say that this company changed the world, that this company, you know, internally they think I'm overselling it when I say that. Well, I know we changed the world, so I'm gonna say it, but this is, you know, this says it very nicely in a way. Just a little fun fact, Cyrus, if you're trying to figure out how old Cyrus was when he was born, the same week that Lincoln was born, I believe. And this is where it all started. I know some of you guys have made the pilgrimage. I haven't been there, but you know, right there in that blacksmith shop on the bottom floor is where it all started, where the Reaper happened. And you know, I'm amazed that it's still there and pleased, and I wish we worked with them more. This is that painting that we had, was burned in an executive's house, burned down, but it's a beautiful painting. You know, N.C. Wyeth was an illustrator. He's the father of Andrew Wyeth, who's one of the most famous American painters. So, you know, I love that painting. It tells the story of that day. These are reproductions at the Virginia Tech Museum. We also have, these are from 1931, 100th anniversary. We build a lot of reproductions. There are guys out there that say, hey, I've got an original Reaper, but I don't think that's the case. I think most of what everybody has is from 1931. We made a lot of them. I went behind the scenes at the Museum of Science and Industry. They've got one that's beautifully intact. Ours are in a crate now in Lisle, and one's good and one's has some replacement pieces to it. We also have one, I figured out it's a reproduction that same year, but it's from 1847. It's a Chicago Reaper. It's one of the first mass-produced rather than, you know, made by a blacksmith or whatever. These, I'm sure you know this story, but, you know, mechanized farming, you know, if it wasn't for Cyrus, you know, we were still harvesting grain with a cradle or something, you know, it's just crazy. You know, again, it did change the world, you know. We fed half of the human race. And really, a lot of those land serfs, you know, the guys who had to work for the big man, now could run their own farm, now could harvest their own grain, now could, I mean, it changed so much. I love this painting, and I keep coming across this statement that, you know, the Reaper was responsible for moving the American West, the frontier, 30 miles a year. I mean, I'm sure it's not solely responsible, but it had something to do with it. You know? I'm not going to go through all this, but you can see, you know, McCormick was a smart man. He didn't invent all these new versions of the Reaper. He bought a lot of the technology, but he was smart enough to buy it and use it and put it on his products. And you know, with each version, there was more productivity. You know, I mean, I like this photo, and I'm showing. I'm sure there's somebody here, maybe there's somebody here who doesn't know why we talk about binders all the time, but here's a binder. And in the center of the photo, I think you can see the twine, a big metal canister of twine, and that's later on in my little bit here, you know, twine was such a critical part of our manufacturing and our whole business. You know, why did Cyrus move to Chicago? Well, he was manufacturing out east in Virginia or south. And, you know, he had different guys making 5 or 10 reapers at a time, and they had the license then to sell them. Shipping to Chicago without a real railroad system was difficult. He didn't like a lot of what he saw when other people were making his equipment. And he just wasn't close enough to the heartland, you know, to where the equipment was being sold. I mean, he had to ship, you know, go some 130 miles or something to the coast, ship all the way down and around up the Mississippi and up the Ohio River. I mean, that's crazy. One year he missed harvest season. You know, it was what helped him move to Chicago, I think. You know, not only was his first plant in Chicago, you know, a big deal for him, but really one of the first factories in the world to make standardized parts. I mean, that's a huge development. You know, what was Chicago like then? 16,000 people on the edge of the frontier, if you can imagine. You know, we had everything. We had railroad, we had, you know, the lake, we had the river, and he had wealthy friends who all became partners. Many of them became partners. William Ogden. I mean, we have in Lisle, in Chicago, we have Ogden Avenue. You know, there's Ogden, Utah. But you know, so that guy was a big player. It helped Cyrus build. He really, when he showed up in Chicago, he did not have a lot of money. And it's right, if you're ever in Chicago, you know, the Reaper Works were, Howard and I keep trying to exactly pin it down, but, you know, right near the Michigan Avenue Bridge, just east of the Michigan Avenue Bridge. Kind of crazy. And where our then corporate offices were for years, both in the NBC Tower and the Equitable Building. But,
When you say Lisle, explain that. They may not know what.
Lisle is where the world headquarters is now. We're 30 miles west of Chicago, near Naperville. But we have you'll see, I have a 78-acre campus. And, no, this is a little detail I probably don't need to get into, but 40 reapers a day, $4,000 a year, in the wages, $1 or $2 a day. Just kind of crazy. You know, when people tell me we didn't change the world, I just point to this. You know, in 1831, what? 90% of the population was making food. I mean, it's a different world today. Okay, this is a little wordy, but really, Cyrus's genius goes far beyond his engineering. It probably wasn't. If he was only an engineer, we wouldn't be here today. We'd be all doing something else. His idea for sales and distribution was absolutely unique. Cyrus and Isaac Singer invented franchise dealerships. I mean, every car dealership today, it can be traced back to Cyrus. He invented it. You know, and Cyrus Jr. took it up, and today, the company is still very, you know, international. You know, this number just, people question it every time I show this number. 36,000 dealerships in 38 countries. And the way I explain it is, you know, in 1912, you couldn't travel 40 miles or 60 miles to pick up a new piece of equipment. You had to go into town. You couldn't, there weren't road, you know, you couldn't jump in your truck and go get something. So we were just everywhere. I mean, I have a list of U.S. dealerships, and it's like unbelievable. I mean, I just look at my neighborhood where I live now, and you know, oh, there was one here in Aurora, and there's one here in Naperville, and there's one here. I mean, it's like, it's crazy. Many of you know the story of the Reaper Wars. It was really a cutthroat business. You know, like 200 Reaper makers at one time, and they were out there all field testing, all, you know, making demonstrations, and really sabotaging each other's equipment. I mean, it was nasty. I mean, they, you know, in the dead of night go and cut something, unbolt something, plant rocks in the field. I mean, they just, it was, I guess that's how business was done, but it, you know, that McCormick survived all that is remarkable. You know, the competition's got a little more refined, sedate when it all moved to Europe. So starting in 1851, Cyrus would take his equipment to Europe, and almost every summer after that, and you know, whether it was Paris or London or wherever, he would make demonstrations of his equipment and very often win these competitions. We have, I mean, John's seen it, we have next to our CEO's office in the hallway a collection of, I don't know, 80 medals or something that he won over time. Some of them are in the Milestones book, but a lot of them aren't. And, you know, it just shows how active, you know, he wasn't just sitting back in the factory, he was always promoting. This quote I love, what the London Times thought of a reaper, a cross between a chariot, a wheelbarrow, and a flying machine. You know, but once they saw it in action, they liked it. This is a fun story that I love to tell. That, you know, it's like, I guess it's the Jay Leno brush with greatness stories. We have a few of those. Cyrus spent a lot of his adult life just defending his patents. You know, everybody was making reapers. He was suing everybody who was copying his work. John Manny in Rockford, Illinois, had a very nice reaper, and Cyrus went after him. Manny figured out the court case was going to be held in Springfield, Illinois, and he, you know, talked to friends and sent telegrams and tried to figure out who the judge was going to be, and then who was the best lawyer, what lawyer was in with the judge. And a young lawyer named Abraham Lincoln was in with this judge. So Manny hired Lincoln. Lincoln went to Rockford, spent 2 days studying Manny's machine, taking notes and writing a brief, went back home to Springfield, got a notice that the court case had been moved to Cincinnati, got on a train and went to Cincinnati. The next day, after he's gone, Manny's letter shows up and says, "We don't need you anymore, we're new venue, we've got guys covering this." But so Lincoln shows up, and the lawyers there, including Edwin Stanton, were like polished professionals, well-dressed, well-groomed experts. Lincoln was a young backwoodsman. They mocked him, showed up with a mud-splattered coat and boots, and they made fun of the man to his face. He decided to stay and see the court case through, just to see. He offered them his legal brief that he'd prepared, and they said, you know, forget it, we'll handle this, we've got this. And Lincoln was really impressed. They won the case against McCormick that round. Lincoln said, I need to learn to be a lawyer like these guys. I need to be able to speak publicly like they do. Lincoln went back and studied. Manny paid Lincoln. He returned the check. The second time they sent it, Lincoln kept it. It was the most money he ever made as a lawyer, apparently, and used it for his political future. So, kind of a fun thing. There were, you know, the government was after McCormick then for his patents. And, you know, they didn't want to extend them. And, you know, but this guy, Senator Johnson, placed the value at, you know, what is that today? 1.5 billion, or is that trillion?
Billion.
Yeah, I mean, crazy numbers. I mean, you know, that's, so they knew it was an important machine. And the patent commissioner goes on and on, I've got, you know, a couple lines of it here, about this great man and his genius and all that. And then he says, but the Reaper's too valuable to the nation, so, you know, no patent, you're done. So that, I mean, McCormick then figured out that really his distribution network was going to have to be his thing. His products could be innovative, but he wasn't always going to have the best and the newest. He had to have the best sales network to get out there. And often he had the best, but complete change of pace. This is the U.S. Capitol Dome, and there's a McCormick Reaper in a fresco. That's Ceres, the goddess of grain. It's, you know, how many of our competitors have something on the U.S. Capitol dome. You know, I mean, to me,
That's pretty.
that's pretty impressive. And then it shows up that in Dan Brown's book, you know, as one of the whatever lost symbols. So it hasn't just been up there forgotten. This is Edwin Stanton. So Lincoln, this is the guy that made fun of Lincoln in Cincinnati. But when Lincoln became president, he hired him to be his Secretary of War during the Civil War. And when the war was over, Stanton said, in a convoluted old world language, but he said if it wasn't for the Reaper, the North would not have won the Civil War. The Reaper allowed a farm to let 4 or 5 boys or men go off to war and fight, and we were still exporting grain during the Civil War, where the South was struggling to find food and, you know, and bodies to go fight the war. We had, because of the Reaper, and ironic because McCormick was a Southerner, you know, so he's kind of, you know, I'm sure he was a little torn, but after the war, another one of our brushes with greatness, Robert E. Lee, we've got this at the archives, you know, writes to Cyrus looking for money, and Cyrus gives him money for his university, the Washington Lee University, and they built a statue there. There's no statue of Lee or Washington, but Cyrus McCormick on campus. So, but I just love to see the real history. I love to see a letter, handwritten letter by Robert E. Lee, you know, in Madison, Wisconsin, in a box somewhere. I mean, cool stuff. So that place in Chicago kept, you know, you can imagine, just kept expanding and expanding as time went on. And I mean, that railroad right there that runs right along the river, I mean, not 15 years ago was bringing, you know, boxcars of paper into the Chicago Sun-Times plant. I mean, I'm sure it was new rails, but it's at the same location. Another one of the innovations, and I'm sure many of you know this, you know, Cyrus invented this deferred payment plan. You know, give me $5 now, harvest your crops, and then pay me. And I mean, imagine how many people do that today, and how that might have changed the farmer's life. And he was really forgiving. If you had a bad year, and you didn't, unlike others, unlike the competition, Cyrus would say, we'll get you next year. Many people say he invented public relations, but what he did when he'd come back from those summer competitions, he'd produce a flyer, you know, no electronic media, so he'd produce a flyer and brag about basically his awards, what he'd won in Europe. And also, direct mail, this is crazy. I mean, when his Farmer's Advance came out, it had a circulation of like 368,000. I mean, imagine, after the 1902 merger, they were over 500,000 newsletters going out. I mean, and it was prose and poetry and farm news. It wasn't, so it had an entertainment. You didn't have television, you know, you didn't have radio, you read your newsletter from the company. So after the fire, he built again, further south, and bigger again. You know, the plant that was there when till the 70s, 60s,
mid-60s.
Yeah. This is so the top red dot is, you know, right near Michigan Avenue where the first plant was, and the second one was down, you know, on the south side. You know, Cyrus continually winning awards. Done more for the cause of agriculture than any other living man. I mean, I think we changed the world. Probably many of you know this story. The Haymarket riots happened about 3 blocks from our plant. Our workers were on strike, and they had non-union guys in there working, and they clashed, and then the anarchists, a third group, came in. It's a complicated story, but, you know, bombs, people killed, people shot, really, really ugly. But out of that came the 8-hour workday. Out of, you know, I mean, sort of, am I proud of that, or, you know, you know, maybe there should have been an 8-hour workday early, but because of what happened at our plant, we have Labor Day, we have an 8-hour work day, and the rest of the world celebrates May Day. We didn't want to be in with the commies, I guess, or something. We weren't going to call it May Day, so we called it Labor Day, but it's the same celebration. I love this photo. This, when I was doing my exploration of the Middle East and North Africa, I came across this. And this is a catalog cover, 1889, and the little caption down at the bottom says, seeking new fields to conquer. I mean, that's where they were. I mean, who is that, a Persian soldier or something? But, they weren't just selling in Iowa anymore. It was, here, 1898, 23% of the business was export. I mean, those crates are going to Palestine, Odessa, Russia, and Sweden. Those are sitting on the dock in Chicago. And that's, Howard, that's a Daisy Reaper in the, I think in the lower right. So I don't know how they got a Daisy Reaper in a crate like that, but you have to buy your own wood. I don't know how that worked. Many of you have seen these postcards, but I just love them. Hand-colored photos of, our equipment all over the world. Algiers, really? There was wheat. Looks like a desert to me, but I guess. This is a painting from a photo in Russia, and how many? 1, 2, 3, 5 binders, all being pulled by camels. This was hanging in the executive suite until Lee Grady went up there and saw it, and the original was hanging in the executive suite, and he said, guys, I gotta fix this for you. So he took it back to the archives and photographed it, made a print, and returned them a photo print because, it's in safekeeping now in Madison. I'm gonna go fast through this Russia stuff, but I did a study recently for our guys that were going to Russia to speak or to talk. But I just can't believe how much we did in Russia, how early we did it. 59 dealerships in 1896, 11 branch houses in 1907. And then we bought a plant there and began making equipment. And this is the number that really boggles my mind. In 1913, we were producing 65,000 machines, including engines. And that was 1/6 of the sales in Russia that year. The rest were all imported from either Sweden, I think, or the US, from Chicago. But so 1914, World War I starts. Here's our first tractor we brought over there, a mogul. And these photos say so much to me when you see the clothing that people are wearing and realize how really old some of this stuff is. Advertising in Russia, I love to see this stuff. There's the plant. It was bigger than you could see here. There were foundries, 2 foundries, I think. There's some workers, and they weren't afraid to look, there's a little kid in there. I guess that's how things were back in the day. But he's probably working for 50 cents a day or something. So when we got into World War I, the Bolshevik Revolution had just taken place, and we were worried that the Russians weren't going to stay on our side of the war. So President Woodrow Wilson was good friends with Cyrus Jr. And so he sent him as part of the Root Commission to Russia to figure out how we could help the Russians. So all these guys, mostly military and congressmen, went on a boat across the ocean, got on a train and toured Russia, made some recommendations when they came back. And so we were there to help them, and shortly after that, the Bolsheviks threw out all the IH employees out of the country, except for a few key guys to run the plant. So, thank you very much, but, and ironically to me, right, the Bolsheviks' symbol, right, the sickle and a hammer, and the sickle's the machine that McCormick replaced how many years ago? So until the 90s, we were negotiating with the Soviets through maybe the end of the 60s, like 1969, to get reimbursed for that plant they took over, and finally we didn't, and we quit trying. I'm sure all of you know this story, the merger to create International Harvester. What I didn't know, I mean, you know, why did we go to J.P. Morgan? Because Harold McCormick's father-in-law, Rockefeller, suggested it. You know, so we were with the American elite, I guess. We were right there. And this guy, George Perkins, somebody asked me, who created the name International Harvester? And it was Perkins. He was the junior partner at J.P. Morgan who handled the whole deal. He actually, I think, ran the company for a few years when McCormick and Deering couldn't get along. So they have a third party that kind of, you know, takes phone calls from one guy, takes phone calls from another guy, or cables or whatever it was, and makes it happen. You know, here are the guys that Cyrus Jr. at the time, his senior was gone. We got the Springfield plant as part of that deal. I just did a whole history on Springfield, and this building was, or they claimed to be the largest in the world, harvesting machine building in the world, and it looks like it from here. You know, later, after the fire in Chicago, Cyrus, I think, regained that title. But look at the size of the Springfield plant in 1901. I mean, just crazy. When Deering came in, he brought in this concept of vertical integration. Something we don't do today, but they thought it was a way to guarantee production. You know, some supplier isn't going to miss a deadline and production's going to stop. And save money because you own all the stuff. You own your own ore mines, you own your own coal mines, you own your own steel mill, lumber yard. We had 90,000 acres of old growth hardwood forests to supply our own lumber. You know, they weren't going down to Home Depot. They were